down following earnings despite the company reporting 50% revenue growth in its second quarter. Here to comment on the report is Ben Pouladian, founder and CEO of BEP Research. Welcome back to the show, Ben.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate everything.
Of course. AMD seemed to have a great quarter on paper, but obviously the market did not react in that way. Why do you think the market was reacting so badly to the earnings yesterday?
I was at the Advancing AI event a few weeks ago in San Francisco, and a lot of hype and promise for the company. They've been really trying to push the AI hyperscale narrative, which they have. But I think the challenge is the Helios, which is their premier double wide rack scale product will be effectively in high ramp probably the end of this year or really into the first quarter of next year, and that really pushes out the revenue and numbers for a lot of the estimates that Wall Street has and a lot of these analysts, and the growth isn't really there. Couple that with what, Elon said yesterday on the SpaceX call. He said, "We're exclusively going to use NVIDIA GPUs on the Vera Rubin, architecture." So another blow for AMD from a product, customer standpoint as well.
Mhm. How bad is it that the Helios revenue is getting pushed to later this year or even next year? I mean, I think speed is of the essence here, obviously, in AI, and all the AI chip startups and companies are trying to move very fast to catch up with NVIDIA.
It's time to market. So if you look at data center developers and, powered land, it really starts at that point, maybe like a year and a half or a year ago where you're th you're thinking about what architecture you're gonna put into that data center. So if you're picking AMD and you wanna use those products, you probably plan this out maybe 2 years before or a year and a half before, and getting that supply at the right time, at the right moment to work is important because you wanna energize as fast as you can to get those tokens online, and the longer it takes to get that ramp, the more behind you are, even though you say you have a better product at the time.
Mhm. Obviously, AMD also makes money from CPUs as well. That's a big part of their business today. They're increasingly making money from CPUs specifically in data centers, and they did say yesterday that they are taking market share there from Intel. However, we're also seeing, increased competition from NVIDIA as well, who's also now selling standalone CPU server racks. Where do you kind of see all this shaking out in terms of these market dynamics for CPUs in the next, 12 to 18 months?
There's definitely a big inflection in agentic AI, and that's where the CPU usage is getting, a lot of its demand from, and you've seen companies like AMD and Intel raising CPU prices 35-40%. Traditional, server makers like Dell and HP are w are marking up servers that cost businesses, 20, $30,000, now they're $100,000, 4x because of memory and storage, everything. There's this huge compute inflation going on because demand is so acute and supply is so tight. AMD has a great CPU franchise, and that's probably what they're going to lead with, but it's really not enough to carry them into, what is going on on the AI infrastructure build out. That's just one wedge to basically open up other things, but they need their Helios rack system and other systems to really ramp up and get there fast. I think one of the challenges that people really miss is that Helios is sort of what Blackwell to NVIDIA was a few years ago. The rack trace has, like, a lot of these big, thick cables, and it's pretty complex, and it's double wide. So when you try to actually assemble at scale, like, you're gonna have issues, and NVIDIA actually had delays and went through this whole learning curve to understand how to assemble these things because 'cause they're so big and massive, and on the next generation for Vera Rubin, they actually went cableless. So from a physical product generational standpoint, you could effectively think or say that AMD Helios is almost like a year behind
Mhm.
in technology knowledge on that.
So it sounds like both, Helios is gonna take maybe longer than some people expected to ramp up, but even whenever it does, it sounds like there's a pretty good chance that they might run into, um, issues that they weren't expecting around, like, actually getting the physical server racks up and running, similar to what we saw with an NVIDIA and Blackwell, as you pointed out.
Yes. I mean, that's kind of the way we see it and, the way Lisa Su approached the call as far as the ramp. You could really hear that things a few items are shipping this quarter and then a little bit more next quarter, and then the big ramp, according to her, was Q1 of 2027,
Mhm.
which in AI data center land is like is almost like a generation behind from her competitor as far as time to first token.
Yep. And taking it back to CPUs for a second, can you just break down to me, why exactly are CPUs important for agentic AI specifically?
The CPU is sort of like the conductor. It tells the GPUs what to do, and because you're running multiple agents at the same time doing these processes, you need a CPU to sort of schedule these things, and you see a lot of CPU tool call usage in coding workflows, obviously like Claude Code or Codex, running multiple agents at the same time, building something, running a web search, adding to a repo. So you have these things all working in parallel for you, and the CPU is orchestrating that. A lot of the time, the GPU isn't really doing anything, it's waiting for the instructions from the CPU to do those. And as you add multiple call loops and tasks, uh, you increase your CPU usage. And I think the big debate or the question in the industry between all these companies is how many what's the ratio between the number of CPUs and GPUs? I think, going back to what NVIDIA has done with the Vera Rubin and their architecture, the Vera CPU, I think, was purpose built for this agentic moment when it was co-designed with OpenAI and the other companies. And it really has the performance for these agentic, long horizon agentic tool calls and tasks that are usually happening with these new AI models, basically doing longer work, at longer periods of time without less interruptions, and that's where all these things play in.
Mhm. So it sounds like because of all these reasons, AMD is facing a bit of an uphill battle. I think even more than that, AMD obviously is seeing its revenue grow quickly, but Nvidia is growing faster and it has a larger revenue base to begin with. I mean, what do you think it'll take? Like what is it going to take for AMD to, you know, sustain that growth and, even stand a chance at catching up with Nvidia or getting closer in some way? What does it need to do and really execute on in the next 12 months?
I wrote about this, last night on my research Substack. I feel like AMD is sort of squeezed in the middle because on the top, you have NVIDIA, who basically dominates on training and, inference. You have Google TPU, and then you have basically every hyperscaler like Amazon Trainium, Microsoft Maya, even Meta has its own custom chip, and then OpenAI Jalapeno. So you have that custom stack, and then you have these guys on the bottom, like these new startups, or like Cerebras or Etched or Positron. They're all trying to get a piece of inference, and they're going to hyperscalers and saying, "Hey, can you just put our equipment in your data center? We'll give this to you for free. We just want to show that we have customers." And A&D sort of stuck in the middle because they're getting compressed on both sides from a margin perspective and a margin profile because, like, they're not gonna win on training, and they're trying to be, like, the best, lowest cost inference player, but then you have all these other guys trying to do it as well. So I think for them to really find their value proposition is they really need to lean in onto their CPU franchise and really build a system that works really well for specific agentic workloads and dominate on that before the startups really try to eat their market share. And NVIDIA, I think, will still have a large dominating market share of what it's doing, but but the market is getting so big. I think Lisa Su at the event put by 2030, the total addressable market for advanced HPC computer data center AI is about $1.3 trillion.
Mm,
So I think there's enough for everyone to play and get a piece. The question is how much of that do you get and what's your margin profile behind it?
mhm. kind of the entire pie is growing, so
Yeah.
everybody's share is growing, even if you're not eating into NVIDIA's. I mean, I think along those lines, taking a step back, you mentioned obviously there's AMD, there's the hyperscalers that have their own chips, there's the model developers that have their own chips, and then there's just like the dozens of AI chip startups out there, like Etch and all these others that are trying their hand at this too. I'm just curious, compared to 12 months ago, would you say that you're more like, are you more or less optimistic, I guess, about all these other players, eating into NVIDIA's share?
I think competition is obviously healthy for the market. Uh, o Obviously, when going back 20 years, NVIDIA was always competing against other graphics card companies of 3D effects and silicon graphics. It's the nature of Silicon Valley and startups and disruption. If you see a big market and there's a huge opportunity, why not, try to attack it? And a lot of these investors and venture capital firms, their exit strategy for these companies isn't an IPO, it's creating that nuisance factor that eventually one of the larger companies will absorb them or the team. So you have, Intel and SambaNova that are already close together. You already have this, Cerebras AMD partnership that's happening, and then maybe you have a host of other startups that will probably go to Qualcomm or Marvell or one of these other larger, chip companies will absorb the teams to further their, custom ASIC and AI designs, and I think
Mm,
that's just how things go in the cycles of the valley. It's just another cycle.
very true. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, Ben. And that was Ben Pouladian, founder and CEO of BEP Research.